our servers break and like our platform is down, or like we face some pressure from a competitor, that's not nearly as hard as waking up and not being able to have a meal, right? Like there's nothing that's like, in fact, it is a privilege to have these problems, right?
Right. Right.
And so I think that's a huge part of the way I contextualize it is like I am deeply privileged that our servers are broken or that one of our competitors is being super annoying or aggressive.
Welcome to The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. Since 1996, this organization has been investing in the next generation of African American leaders. And this podcast highlights the stories of the scholars, alumni, staff, and friends that make this program special. Hey y'all, this is Ray Pryor, 2015 Ron Brown Scholar. And in this episode, I'm excited for you to hear Javaughn Lawrence share his story. He's a 2010 Ron Brown Scholar and is now the CEO and co-founder of Drip, a live stream commerce marketplace for physical collectibles and NFTs. As a kid, Javaughn was trading Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokémon cards with his friends and his classmates, fascinated by the same collectibles that would later sell on his platform for millions of dollars. That same kid, who would go on to graduate from Yale and have successful stints in consulting, technology, and venture, was actually placed in remedial classes in middle school. And how does Javaughn handle this news? He sneaks into the gifted and talented classes and then teaches himself algebra years before he could even take the class. What I appreciate most about Javaughn is that despite having more than enough to complain about and brag about in his life, he doesn't tell a single story without expressing his gratitude for the people and the circumstances that made him who he is. Take a listen.
Before I was, extremely fortunate to become an RBS scholar, I grew up between Jamaica and Miami. I spent my first 10 years in Jamaica, grew up in this town called Montego Bay. And I think I was, extremely lucky because, even though it was a typical, low income background, I think I was exceedingly fortunate because I grew up in a relatively rural area that had lots of awesome nature. I had fantastic neighbors. And, as a result, even though I had a lot of freedom as a kid, I was really kind of able to kind of develop and explore a lot. Was extremely fortunate for that. So I spent a lot of my early childhood climbing trees and making my own toys from recycled items and making my own cricket bats and just being outside with friends. And so I think I was like, extremely fortunate to kind of grow up in Montego Bay the times that I did, and I think I learned a lot of creativity and gratitude from that. And then I would say I won the lottery, and this proverbial lottery, but my mother made the decision when I was 10 years old that it was time for us to move to the US. And so in April of 2001, we decided to move to Miami, Florida. And I think we were very, very fortunate, again, to just have a lot of family members who had already moved to the US and had been here for decades that were extremely kind of awesome supports. And so, I think the thing that I was like very lucky to have, the Tuesday before I moved to the US, I was outside playing cricket with my friends. And then a week later, after I'd moved to the US, I was outside again playing cricket, right? And which is a very, very kind of, cricket's not an American sport. And so the fact that I was able to be in an area where I was able to have that experience so early when moving here, I think was incredible. I think that the core unlock that I would say for my life was, one, I think I just felt this amazing gratitude for being in the US at the time. And then I think the second incredible unlock was, this is really for my mom, but she just committed a lot to my education, right? And she made a lot of sacrifices to make sure that I was able to get the right education and be in the right places. And so I remember one of the core decisions she made was she decided that we were going to live, in this town called Coral Springs, which is, probably one of the safer towns in the US. And we ended up living in one of the not so nice areas of town. But as a result of that, I was able to go to a great middle school. And then, it just so happened that in the area I lived, there was just like a tremendous amount of like just great infrastructure, like to live a
Right.
good life. So everything from having like a city bus system to having great public libraries and other institutions. I was like super lucky, and so like I spent a lot of my preteen and teen years just like going and exploring the city and kind of going to libraries and bookstores in a way that like a lot of people just don't have that access in a lot of places in the US. I remember when I went to high school, I ended up going to a high school that was outside of my hometown. So against my will, my mother applied the principle of just like saying, "Hey, you need to get the best education possible." And so she decided to send me to a high school that was about 45 minutes away from each trip was 45 minutes. So it was like about, almost 2 hours a day of travel. But she sent
Well,
me to high school that far away and to join the IB program. And I was like extremely fortunate to get, a world-class education through that program and also just built up incredible friendships with people that are still friends to this day. Like a lot of my friends from high school, my close friends have actually moved to San Francisco and they're engineers or they're investors. And so I think I was like very fortunate for that. I think like my experience, before RBS was very humble. Didn't have, typical scholar, just didn't, single mom, didn't have a lot of resources. When I was in Jamaica, some days didn't eat meals. I probably ate like on average like 2 meals a day in Jamaica. When I moved to the States, it was probably
yeah,
like I got closer to three. And so that was great.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Man, I appreciate you walking through that. It's clear to me that when you look back on your life, you are very grateful for all the opportunities and the people who have been in your corner. I wanted to come back to Javaughn in high school. Obviously, you had to. You're really smart, so you also had a lot to offer in addition to being granted all of these opportunities. You ended up at Yale, after you were selected as a scholar. When did a place like Yale come onto your radar? When did you realize that a place like that was somewhere you wanted to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe what I'll do is I'll cut it back to even middle school. Middle school was like a really critical kind of part of my life, and the reason is because like it was like in some ways it was kind of break make or break. So I kind of moved to this new middle school. I lived in, as I mentioned, I lived in like an area that was not as safe, and I remember my first day of middle school. Even though the school itself was safe, the area wasn't safe, and so like my first day of middle school, like I remember I was sitting at the front in the first seat of the bus, and we had to sit three a seat, and there was like this kid, these two guys that were sitting next to me that got into a fight. Like literally when I was on the bus, right?
Yeah,
And so like I think like, and I was like really shook. I ended up, having to become friends with a guy who like won the fight because I was like, yo, I need to stay protected,
yeah,
And I think that one of the things that like about middle school that was interesting was like I was kind of like at a few moments always confronted with which direction I was gonna go in, right?
mm,
Because like I was like went to this good middle school, but like had people that were in a neighborhood that wasn't, weren't as good, right? They probably weren't as bad as like other areas, but like in the US in the grand scheme of things, but like weren't necessarily good kids. Were getting suspended all the time.
right,
And then I was also placed in remedial classes in the sixth grade. So I wasn't like a high potential kid in middle school. Like I was actually like, I started out as a very low potential. I was like reading below grade level, was in remedial classes, as I mentioned. And I think the thing that I was like very fortunate for was that there were just teachers that just invested in me. I
mm,
remember this lady named Miss Adams who was this like old, like kind of crinkly faced lady who was kind of scary, but she taught me my remedial reading classes and she just like imbued in me a passion for reading. And that was, that investment that she made in me. I remember like she like literally like wrote like on my interim report card in my kind of second semester, she wrote, Javaughn has a C. Javaughn is a high potential person. She wrote that as a note, like a long note to my mother. And she was like, and she was just insisted that I was just gonna do well. And so, I was able to kind of get to reading grade level, by the sixth grade. And then, in the seventh grade, like I remember I had this other tendency of always accidentally going into classes that were more gifted than I was supposed to be placed in.
mm,
And, I did that in sixth grade. I got kicked out on my first day. And then in seventh grade, that same thing happened. I went into this teacher's class named Mr. Ritter, and it was an algebra one class. And I sat down in the class, and Mr. Ritter was like, you know, you don't belong here, right? Like you have to leave. And it was me and this other, I remember there's like another girl in the class that also got kicked out. And I was just like, yo, like I had already, by the way, like this was like, I think 2, 3 days I was in the class. and I already convinced my mom to buy me a TI-83 plus calculator. Like I was ready to do algebra. I wasn't
Right.
prepared for it, but I was ready to do it. And I just literally spent that year actually just studying algebra and my regular math. So I taught myself algebra that year. And I convinced Mr. Ritter to actually like allow me to take all the tests for the algebra class. And I ended up getting like, I think unofficially I probably got like an A minus in the class, but I wasn't officially in the class. And he ended
Wow.
up like making me the best math student for that team that year over the algebra kids. The kids that were
Wow.
taking the class, he was like, "Yeah, you're," because he taught me pre-algebra and algebra, and he was like, "Yeah, yeah, you're the best kid." And then, I think in 8th grade, the school then decided to put me in like a gifted program. And, I started to kind of hang around peers that were just a lot smarter. And, some of them are actually still my friends to this day. Like one of my former roommates was someone I met on my team in the 8th grade. And, and that's when I started to kind of hang around with kids that were, from a nicer track in my city. And I started learning about different places. And so that, like when I was in the 8th grade, that's when I actually finally found out about Yale as a
Right.
place, and that's the
Wow.
only place I knew. I was, like, talking to this other student, and she told me, it was like, "Yeah." She was like, "I wanna go to Yale." I'm like, "Oh, what is Yale?" And, like, I ended up finding out about what Yale was. But even when I went to, high school, it wasn't, like, necessarily something that was strictly on my radar. Like, it wasn't, like, something I
Right.
thought about consistently. I wasn't like, "Hey, I wanna go to an Ivy League school." In fact, what I thought was that, I had one older cousin who'd gone to the University of Florida, and I was like, "Yeah, maybe I'll just go to the University of Florida." And, I think my mom at the time, for all her aspirations for my life, she retroactively told me that, like, she was just like, "Yo, I just want you to go to any college." My mom had never graduated high school herself because she had me when she was a teenager.
Mm.
And so she just wanted me to go to any sort of, community college, but, she still just pushed me to do the absolute best. And so, I think in high school, I was just very heads like, for the most part, I was, like, very much, like, heads down, having fun, right? Having fun, learning, and working really, really hard in my classes. But I never really thought about, Yale wasn't at the top of my mind or any other Ivy League
Right.
until I think it was like probably the summer of my junior year. I heard about this other organization called Questbridge, which, I'm sure there are quite a few RBS scholars who have gone through
Yeah.
Questbridge as well. And, they kind of said that like, hey, you could basically go to this college, you can go to any one of these colleges and get a full ride. And I remember
Right.
going to Yale my junior year, summer of my junior year, my great aunt, not my mom, because my mom had to work. My great aunt took me there, and I was able to, you know, from that experience, like see Yale, right? I was able to
Right.
visualize this magnificent and beautiful place, and I was able to see, lots of people like before this is pre-RBS, but a lot of kids who were aspirational like me that wanted to kind of go through that same, that had dreams of going to an Ivy League school, and then hearing, the guy who started Questbridge, a guy named Michael McCullough, say that, hey, you can go to a school like this and they will pay for you to go here. So that's when I
Wow.
really kind of, started realizing that Yale was a thing that was possible for me. And then, from there I just, just kind of just went through the process of, Questbridge and to kind of, work to get in.
Yeah. If we just summarize briefly the story of
Mhm,
that point, right, of junior year,
mhm,
0 to 10, you're in Jamaica, living life, playing cricket, having
mhm.
some days that are harder than others in terms of taking care of your own needs, and then you move to a new country. You come to Florida, still playing cricket, right?
Yeah.
But figuring out what life is like here, and then who you want to be. First day of middle school, fight breaks out, and you're like, "Whoa, this is a wake up call." From remedial classes in 6th grade to being the best math student in 8th grade, visiting Yale,
Oh, so I was the
man.
best math student in the 7th grade, and I was the best student overall in 8th grade. I forgot to mention that, and, like,
There we
was
are.
awarded, like, a
Yeah.
military award in 8th grade as well. All from teachers invested in me, by the way.
And this is like your third year in the country, right? Like you
That
third or
yeah,
fourth or
probably,
something like that?
like, 4th or 5th year solid year in the
Wow.
country, yeah. Yeah.
And you're going to middle and you're in middle school, and middle school can be a crazy time for everybody. So that was
Yeah.
it's just a powerful stretch that I can see now that set up the high school version of Javaughn to hear about Yale, to hear what other students are talking about. Oh, they're talking about Yale. They're talking about Questbridge. They're talking about these other
Yep.
things. Maybe I should be on the end too. what was it actually like? What was it like when you got there and you spent 4 years there? What were some of those like most memorable or formidable experiences as a student there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think again, I was extremely fortunate to go to Yale, and I know I'm also one of the few RBS scholars to go to Yale. Like it's most people go to Harvard or Stanford, but I was like
Yeah.
pretty bent on going to Yale. I had a great time, man. I think like when I first got to Yale, it was kind of like a fresh off the boat thing. I was just so excited to be there. I was just like, oh my god, this like amazing place. Like I for the first time, like I had like my own bed and like I had meals every single day, and it was and like there were like all these other really really smart kids all from all over the world, and so I was just so excited to be there. Like
Yeah.
I was so excited and so fortunate to kind of be in this incredible place, with all these like just incredible people, and so I loved it, and I think I carried a lot of that energy throughout my entire time at Yale. When I first went to Yale, though, I initially thought I wanted to just be, an economist, and then, over time, potentially become an economist, become a politician. And so, like for me, I was just
Mm.
like, hey, I want to like, focus on just like taking tons of econ classes and just becoming really smart, and then, becoming a Nobel Prize laureate. That persisted for probably a lot of my first year, and then what ended up happening is like there was a friend that I'd met in middle school after summer freshman year who went to Duke. I know you went to Duke, Ray. So like
Yeah.
and he was working on a company called Query, which was kind of like a question and answer kind of community focused on intellectual topics. And he was like, "Hey, man, like, if you're going to free this summer, you want to come help me out on this." And I ended up working with him that summer to kind of launch this product and learned a ton from the experience. I think our first hypothesis was like we'd become this like interesting place for like people to have intellectual discussions, and it eventually kind of just divulged into just being a chat forum for Jersey Shore episodes. But I think the experience
Yeah.
of kind of going through the process of trying to convince my friends and of trying to then create this community where people like built an identity around these interactions on this platform was just so enthralling, and I was so excited about it. And so, I remember after that summer I committed. I was like, yeah, I just want to start companies. That's all I
Yeah.
literally want to do. I just want to build things, and so I spent a lot of my time after that at Yale, focusing on doing well in classes, but also just spend time building. So I ended up building a few companies while I was in college after that. So I ended up like after that I built I think like two or three other companies, and just like kept on exploring. And so for me at Yale, it was about like, hey, I just want to learn as much as possible. The way I learn is I'm going to work on building stuff, and I'm going to just work on like connecting with the smartest and most interesting people I possibly could in my class.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of that was, each year I was working on a new company. So my sophomore year, I helped a friend push out a peer-to-peer textbook trading company. My junior year, I worked on a streaming company focused on foreign policy discussions with another classmate. And then, finally, in my senior year, I ended up like helping to co-found a social commerce company focused on peer-to-peer buying and selling of products on WhatsApp, right? And we raised some
Okay.
capital for that, right? And so, yeah, that was a lot of my time at Yale. I was also involved in lots of different activities and clubs as well, entrepreneurship club, leadership club, finance club. I was in a fraternity as well, Sigma Chi, which was very, very beneficial for me for when I joined, and even post Yale, it's been fantastic.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I was super involved. But my core philosophy at Yale was, after deciding I didn't want to be an economist, was I'm just going to learn as much as I possibly can, and I'm going to do that through like building stuff as much as I can, and just fail as much as I could because I knew that like like I wouldn't have the opportunity to do that as much, as an adult, and I understood
Right.
that. And then the next bit was I was just going to make sure that like I kept on meeting the most interesting people I possibly could and just learning from them as
Yeah.
much as I could as well. So, I was able to do that, quite a bit at Yale, and I was extremely fortunate for a lot of the friends that was able to make from it, and who are still lifelong friends to this day. So, like my Yale experience was fantastic.
Yeah. Man, it's quite a shift that you made of coming in thinking you want to be an economist and have interest in politics, and then you spend all day and night. I can just imagine you in your dorm room with your friends tinkering on different things and building things. As you were building all those companies in college, was the objective ever like, we want to build something super successful, this needs to be the next biggest thing, or were you just enjoying the process of building whatever it was?
It was just enjoying the process. That was it
Mm,
for me. It was enjoying the process, and it was about learning, right?
yeah,
And ideally having an impact, and maybe that impact would have been a very large company, but it was just like, what is the coolest thing that we could potentially do, right? And so for
right.
me, what that looked like was, with the peer-to-peer textbook trading company, like the coolest thing was seeing the first trade that happened between students. With the streaming company was like having Anne Marie Slaughter, who was a senior policy advisor to Barack Obama at the time, lead a discussion with someone who was based in Syria and a refugee in Sweden. Very cool impact, right? And then, with the social commerce company, it was like, again, seeing those first initial interactions, but then working to actually raise an initial round of capital. So we ended up raising,
Right.
$75,000 for that venture. And so, like, being able to kind of like progressively have a bigger impact and learn more and more was just like a lot of the core objective for
Right.
that. And I think one of the insights that I don't know how I happened upon this insight. I think it was a combination of talking to peers that just had extremely successful kind of family members, and then some historical figures that had followed. But I think one of the core things I realized was that, like, in order to be successful, you just need a certain level of knowledge and know-how. And so how do I acquire that? And one of the ways I thought about doing that was just by doing. The other way was by meeting the smartest and most interesting people I could at in college as well.
I can see all of the seeds of a lot of who you have been recently and who you are today getting planted back in all of those Yale experiences.
Yep.
So after you graduate, what do you do after graduating from Yale?
Yeah. So what I really wanted to do after I graduated from Yale was to start a company, and I had been working on this company, this social commerce company called the Vine List for trading textbooks, as I mentioned, and we'd raised a little bit of capital for it, but I just didn't feel like it was enough to actually just go ahead and do that job,
Mm,
and run that company fully. And so what I ended up doing was I decided to take a full-time job at Bain and Company, which is a
okay.
consulting firm. And for me, the rationale was like, I know I want to build a company long term, but I still need to kind of make sure that I'm building up that pedigree and that set of experiences that I need to do that well. And so, first
Mm,
job out of college, I worked at Bain and Company, and got to travel around the country, working for some really really awesome clients, and learning a lot from folks who were kind of at the top of their industry, like from working for very large retailers to telecom companies to defense and security companies. I was able to kind of get a really awesome initial kind of introduction to business at these high
right.
levels. And so that was the first job out of college. It was tremendous amount of fun. I got to travel like every single week. I probably in hotels in I think like 8 cities while I was there,
Oh, that's cool.
um, and got to just build up some really really phenomenal skill sets. But, after about 2 years at Bain, I knew that, I wanted to be in technology. And
Mm,
so I'd also like, I'd still been one of the other things is, like, I was actually still working on Vimeless while I was at Bain. And so I was like, which consulting it by itself is a lot of work, and then trying to
yeah.
build a company on the side is
Yeah.
it's even more work. But I don't regret trying to do both those things at the same time. I just needed to learn. I needed the experience. And so, that's what I did. But, after 2 years at Bain, I, started exploring different jobs in technology, started looking at venture, I started looking at big companies, and then ended up, like, interviewing at some big companies, which was, like, a very fascinating experience. I ended up, like, going through the process with a few different venture firms. One firm, Cosino Ventures, which I'll actually mention, they're important. Like, I applied for a role there, didn't end up getting that role there, but kept in touch with the partners at that firm, and then started to interview at big tech companies like LinkedIn, and then like a few startups. And then I remember ended up getting an offer at LinkedIn, and then at around the same time. I was talking to this other startup, and like the CEO of this startup, and this startup, like, this guy is like a super well known, CEO, but like he ended up like calling me to give me an offer at a startup. And I ended up
Mm,
turning it down and decided to go to LinkedIn. And the reason why I decided to go to LinkedIn was, I just really, really liked the leader that I was going to be able to work for there. She was like someone who'd spent some time in consulting as well, but she'd built up enough empathy and understanding of what my experience was, and was committed to training me. And so, I ended up spending a year at LinkedIn. I ended up moving. So I was in Atlanta for Bain. I moved to New York for LinkedIn,
mm,
and then, spent a year at LinkedIn and learned a ton, and was able to kind of like, reconnect with a lot of my friends from college who, were not in Atlanta. A lot of them were in New York,
mm,
and ended up having a great experience at LinkedIn. I think, I was able to kind of really see how just great the skill set I'd built as a consultant was, right?
right,
Kind of applied to other industries, and so that was a ton of fun. But I think being able to do that and also having a lot of impact, like I think one of the cool things was I was basically able to kind of run, basically kind of like my job was like in sales ops. So I was basically kind of just like building out, like helping to build out the strategy for this $300 million business unit, and then assigning sales leaders like what their quotas were going to be for the coming year. So it was like very much like a, super involved and analytical role that required me to communicate with people that were a lot more senior and more experienced than I was.
mm,
And so being able to do that and kind of dot my I's and cross my T's was super important for that role. And while in New York, I'd actually started to develop an interest in artificial intelligence, and I'd always been like in any city that I'd gone through, like whether doing internships in college, I'd always like been connected to like the startup communities. Like I'd always like just stayed plugged in, and while I was in New York, I ended up deciding to actually like help launch a community called Bots and AI New York. And this was really a community focused on educating engineers and business folks about what the latest trends were in machine learning and chatbots and voice technology. And so ended up like running that ecosystem for about a year, and built it up to almost 5,000 members, but about 150 to 200 people that showed up every month for our events, and learned a ton, built up a really solid network there. And towards the end of that time in LinkedIn, and mind you, to orient you, this was in spring 2017. I started to get bored at LinkedIn. It was a great role, but I felt like I'd learned as much as I would have been able to learn, and I kind of had a reinvigorated interest in venture capital, and so
mm,
started to go out and apply for other roles. And I applied for quite a few roles, didn't quite make it with any different firms, and it was somewhat disheartening. But I was like, I'm just gonna keep on pushing on this.
mm,
And then going back, I ended up, reconnecting with the folks at Costa Ventures, who I'd interviewed with. I'd been a finalist for a role a year before, and but didn't get the role. And they said they were like hiring interns for the summer.
mm,
And so, and it was going to be kind of full-time internship role. Obviously working at a company like LinkedIn, you can't just tell them, hey, I want to leave for the summer and get an internship.
right,
And so what I ended up doing was, I ended up quitting my job at LinkedIn. I ended up moving to Palo Alto, so moving across the country from New York to Palo Alto, San Francisco, and in Palo Alto, not San Francisco, Palo Alto, the Bay Area, and living at a hacker hostel. So this was like kind of like a house where there were like a
wow,
lot of engineers and other people living at a hacker hostel, and then working at Costanoa as an intern during the days. And it was a big risk to take, on myself. But I thought at that point I was just like, I feel like this is the only way I'm going to be able to actually really get into venture. Like I'm almost 3 years out of college. My career, I need to be moving faster. And so took that risk. And, the entire summer, it was a fantastic experience because I was able to really get, a front row seat into like, the best place in the world for technology in Silicon Valley. And,
right,
able to work for, a firm that was kind of deeply rooted in the innovation for Silicon Valley. So the guy who started Coastal Ventures, he was the first product manager for Netscape, the first web browser, and
right,
so he'd been deeply connected in the Valley. And so I was able to just meet a ton of really, awesome people in the ecosystem during that summer, and was able to kind of look at a lot of different deals and really learn a lot of the fundamentals about venture capital and just early stage startups in general. It was a fantastic experience. At the same time, I had to figure out what I was gonna do afterwards. I
Right.
wasn't There was another intern in my class who was in business school, and in fact, like, the way that course I think I kinda skirted by, like, I don't know how they I skirted through by becoming, like, an intern there, because most of the people that they actually bring on are now MBA interns, but
Right.
I was not in business school. So I was like, by the end of the summer, I had to start thinking about what I was gonna be able to do, and started to build a relationship with another firm called ENIAC Ventures before I flew out to Palo Alto. And I just kept on building a relationship with them throughout the summer. One of the partners at Cosanoa fortunately knew one of the partners at ENIAC, and so he was also helping in the back end. But I just kept on building a relationship with them over the summer. And I kid you not, I think it was like my last week at Cosanoa, like on a Tuesday morning, I was getting ready to go to work, and I get a call from the partners at ENIAC, and they're just like, "Hey, Javaughn, we wanted to call to tell you congratulations." It was like everyone on their team like telling me congratulations and giving me the offer, and I was like, "Whew." It was a
Yeah.
sigh of relief. I was like, "Oh my
Yeah.
god, I'm so happy this worked out," because it was a bit of a risk to take. It was a risk, but it wasn't like a life or death risk by any means. Like I had built up, I'd built up a pretty solid, pedigree of experiences by that point, where it wasn't going to
Right.
be that bad. But it was a risk nonetheless. And that morning I heard that I had a full time offer, and so I was like, oh my gosh, this is paid off. And so from there I ended up joining ENIAC as their first full time junior investor. And I think the thing that was like great about that experience was I joined a firm of folks who'd all built companies before, and even more importantly, a lot of them had some similarity or empathy for my core experience. So the partner who actually like ended up fixing, who ended up kind of like I think being a big advocate for me when I was going through the process, was from the Caribbean as well. He was from Guyana, and
Mm.
the other partners at the firm, Nahal, Vic, Nahal, Hadley, Tim, they'd all kind of been founders and kind of had built this firm from the ground up to now like a $500 million AUM firm. But they had a lot of empathy and like for me based on background, but also based on the fact that they were entrepreneurs as well. And so yeah, that was I think ENIAC was a game changer for my career. Right, I was able
Mm.
to join the firm as the first junior investor, and because I was the first junior investor, I think it was great because I was able to kind of like in some ways, like they were figuring out what the role should look like, but it gave me a lot of freedom to kind of like do a lot of my own stuff
Right.
in the role, right? And so, I also decided to stay in San Francisco, and there's one other partner at ENIAC, and then there's like a few other support folks on the team, but I was like the kind of like one of the investors in the Bay, and the rest of the partners were in New York, and so the role was it was just a fantastic role. Like I got to just like meet a ton of really, really smart and incredible founders that I, was able to just like ask them lots of, questions. Some of those questions were dumb about their businesses and about their aspirations and how they're looking to change the world. And I was able to kind of like, then learn about how to actually pick companies and really evaluate those founders to figure out who are the right bets to make. And so it was a fantastic role. Like I, ended up like working a ton. Like I worked a ton as the only junior investor on the team,
Right.
but it was just such a fantastic experience. I was able to even, one of the things I think I kind of probably pushed, which the partner, I'm sure the partners have probably adjusted so far, but I was even to just like push my own deals right across the board. Like I think while I was there, I was able to work on a lot of really great deals, but able to source some really, really interesting opportunities for the firm that are still, solid investments to this day. And so that was also really, really exceptional. And so, I
Yeah.
had a fantastic experience at ENIAC. I can't speak more highly enough about, those guys and the risk that they took on, took on me as the first junior investor in the firm, and then to just like continuously like invest in me, while I was there, but even after, right? Because like after I spent time, after spending time at ENIAC, I went to the partners and I told them I was like, hey guys, like when I joined the firm, I told you I wanted to start a company, and now I actually really do want to start a company. And so, yeah, I want to start a company.
Yeah. I think there's just a common thread throughout your adult life of even at Yale saying, you're going to take, focus on your econ classes, do as well as you can, but then also pursue these ventures with your friends outside of that. You're going to
Mhm.
pursue the opportunities that consulting and working in tech have to offer. And then I think that built up, you already had a high enough built enough risk appetite, confidence in yourself to make that leap, to take the internship all the way across the country. And so I think there's no surprise now that even though you're learning a lot working in venture and being a junior investor, being the first in this role and kind of building it for yourself, did the leap of founding your own company seem inevitable? Did you always know that you were going to land here, or was it maybe something you thought could happen but wasn't something you were actively looking for?
Yeah, I was actively looking for it, and
Yeah,
in fact, I think if I would have, I think if I would have been able to start a company that was fully funded by the time I graduated college, I would have done it, right?
yeah,
It was all like I think everything I'd done, up until starting the company, even though it's all been fantastic, and I think I would not be the founder I am today without those collection of experiences. My goal was always to start a company, right?
right,
And
mm,
I think a lot of people who know me have kind of known that for a while, that like that was always my ambition to build a company.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I mean, kind of continuing the story, I told the partners when I joined ENIAC that that's what I wanted to do. Towards the 2 years of my tenure, closing out at the firm, I told them again that's what I wanted to do. I remember, I told them that, and then they said, "Okay, that's great. We're going to be in full support of you. Start spending some time looking through it." And I think for me, the thread that I always consistently thought about for building a company was, how do I help people generate economic opportunity? Like that was kind of like an underlying theme that like was always, huge for me as a first generation immigrant, and seeing the impact that economic opportunity has had on my own family, right?
right,
And so I that was like always an underlying thread for me, of how do I kind of do this. And so I just started exploring a lot of different ideas. Some that kind of like stuck within that thread, and some that didn't. Started exploring a lot of those different ideas, and as I was starting to explore this in the ENIAC, partners gave me a little bit of freedom to do that. I probably spent like towards the end of my tenure, like maybe 10% of my time looking at potential opportunities. They kind of came to me and they said, "Hey, we're willing to give you some capital to
yeah,
get started on this." And I was just like, "Wow, that's incredible." I was so amazed that they were willing to make that investment in me. But I told him no. I was just like,
wow,
"No, I think I need to take some more time to think about what I wanna build here." And I think
mm,
the core reason why is because I had ideas, but I didn't necessarily feel like I had the crux and I had validated really what I wanted to build. I knew that,
mm,
again, I wanted to figure out like, generally, one of the things I cared about was generating economic opportunity for others, but
right,
I didn't feel like I had the crux of that idea. And so I said, "Hey, I don't, I don't think I want to take the money, but would you guys mind giving me, making me, allowing me to continue to use this office space? And would you allow me to be an EIR at the firm?" And an EIR is basically an entrepreneur in residence. And, to give
right,
you some context, I was probably like 28, 29 at the time. This was like in, 2019. I remember like at the time, like no one is actually like EIRs tend to be people who are, experienced executives or entrepreneurs who've had success.
right,
And I somehow like, yeah, I don't know how this happened, but like in asking for this, for this title, I was able to kind of play way above my pay grade or my experience by having this title. And this allowed me to kind of explore more, and the partners again gave me the space, and I told them, I was like, "Hey, give me the space, and let me just kind of do this and give me this title." And
right,
they stuck behind me, and then I kind of just like went full throttle working from their office to do that, starting in the fall of 2019. And then had a list of ideas that I'd been going through. Like the first idea that I was thinking about was, how do I create a coding boot camp for people in my home country of Jamaica, and then hire them out to folks in the US. Experimented with that, like try to hire some people for it. But then I was just like, like I'm not sure if this is, this idea is necessarily to work. And then from there, I'd also gotten really interested in artificial, like as I mentioned, I'd been doing some artificial intelligence stuff before. And as an investor, I invested in a few companies in that space and was fortunate to sit on a board of a company that was in the space as well. And I was able to see different opportunities coming up. And one of the core themes I saw at the time was generative AI, right? And generative AI is, back then it was called synthetic media. Now it's called generative AI. Saw an opportunity there within like kind of voice and video based technology. And so started
Mm.
to found an engineering co-founder, and we just like started jamming in the ENIAC office in San Francisco and just trying to build voice clones, right? And the first use case that we're going to do was actually dubbing of content into other languages. And so we started just building out. We were building a dubbing studio that was like dubbing. We're like hiring a lot of voice actors to like
Right.
basically dub YouTube content. We were doing like lots of kids content as well. So these are like kind of like any sort of like I don't remember the name of any, but these are some large kids channels on YouTube that we're dubbing content for. And the person I was working with, like he'd already kind of like had a kernel of this, and then like I kind of come in and say, hey, let's use AI to do this. And so we're running
Mm.
this dubbing studio, like generating some revenue, and at the same time, trying to build out the core voice cloning technology. And so we just grinded on it like for like a few months. And like I remember like we ended up getting to a point where like we're able to create a few voice clones. So we created a clone of Barack Obama's voice, and we created a clone of
Mm.
Oprah Winfrey's voice. But it was like an actual like it was not easy, because you literally like, in order to kind of train a lot of these, like the way to train an AI model is like you need to give it clean data, right? And
Right.
so for like if you think about like any sort of language based models or kind of like numeric based models, you just like give it good text, right? But for kind of media, audio and visual based media, the
Mm.
way to clean that data is a lot harder. I'm sure it's going to be
Right.
like editing this podcast and kind of
Yeah.
churning out my ahms and yes, right? But you have to go through the data, and you have to kind of listen to the content and like manually figure out like, hey, where is this right data for this? Like, what is like the cleanest data that I can use to train on this person's voice? And
Right.
so I ended up like, I was like the person that did that manually, right? I just like went through a whole bunch of like audiobook content, and then like some of Barack Obama's speeches, and then just like use that to create voice clones. And we ended up like launching something about like it's a PSA about Barack Obama. Like he made a PSA about breakfast, which was like really funny. But we ultimately kind of realized that with that co-founder, this is something that just happens with startups. But the co-founder, his life situation just didn't make sense for him to continue to build a startup. He'd been
Right.
in the game for 2 years. He just gotten married to his partner who just moved to San Francisco. And so that ended up not working out. And so I ended up taking an L there, and like this was like January 2020. So interesting time. I basically like I kind of like I was just like, yeah, man, I'm like I want to build a company still, but like what do I do? And mind you, COVID was starting to lurk around, and so I
Right.
spent like probably 3 to 4 months just kind of in the wilderness trying to figure out what I was going to do next, right?
Yeah.
And so it was everything from thinking about, hey, do I actually like mostly was like, hey, I think I want to build a company still, but maybe what I should do is I should join an organization that could give me the resourcing that I like, the resourcing, not just the capital, because capital is very valuable, especially now in these markets, but it's more about like, hey, like what is the expert, like how do I kind of think about value? So I spent some time like talking to different organizations for that, try to figure out like these are kind of like accelerators or incubators or startup studios, like just talk to a whole bunch of them. um and kind of went through a few conversations, and ended up deciding to just join a founder community. So I joined a community called On Deck, which is a pretty nice community for entrepreneurs that are looking to build companies in the valley. And joined that community in March of 2020. So like right when lockdown was starting to happen, basically I was like very, very fortunate to I met a potential co-founder, who's now my co-founder and CTO, who I joined On Deck with, and he and I just like spent, we both had interest in video and media technology, particularly in live streaming. Like at the start of COVID, I was just like, yo, like I'm an extrovert. I need to be around
Yeah.
people. And so I was like, yo, how do I hang out with more and more people? And so I kind of like went down the gamut of different ideas for this. And one of the ideas I had was around like, hey, how do I like actually like allow someone to like go do a group fitness class with friends, but also be able to like use machine learning to track their movements that's happening. So if you're doing like jumping jacks, like how do you count the jumping jack and create a leaderboard from that on top of Zoom?
Mm.
And then, this potential co-founder that I was, chatting with, he was working on just doing Zoom fitness classes, like as a general thread. And so, but he and I got super interested in kind of, we kind of jammed and we're like, yeah, like we definitely have a mutual interest in this. And so we ended up like starting to jam. We joined On Deck as a community, as a team. And then we just started just iterating on stuff afterwards. Like we just iterated and iterated and iterated. I think we launched about like 2 or 3 different products into the market. One product that we launched was just like a product to help people schedule Zoom virtual events, right? So anything from a workout class to an art class to a cooking class that people can do virtually. So we did that for a bit. It was a product called Ditto, and we launched it, and it we ended up getting like tens of people that were hosting events. We probably generated, at our peak, a few $1,000s a month, but it wasn't like anything that was like, super exciting. Like I was just like, this is like, I don't know if this is like a thing. This doesn't feel like a
Mm.
thing. I think it was good because it allowed me and this co-founder to, who I actually had not met in person yet. We'd only been hanging out on Zoom because he was to New York, I'm in San Francisco. And but it just allowed us to kind of go through the motions and build a relationship around, like, just like say, hey, like let's work on building this business together, and like let's go through some hard times. Let's get like let's take some losses together, let's take some wins together, and that's how to build up that relationship. And so it was really valuable from that perspective, but we kind of had a feeling that like this wasn't it. Around the same time, I started getting back into Pokemon cards. And so,
Mm.
for context, when I first moved to the US, a huge part of like just my Americanization process was, doing like being involved in like these kind of trading card communities. And so I first started by battling Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and then from there, I then kind of traded those cards up to start getting Pokemon cards, and did that for, up until early middle school. And I basically kind of like got back into it during COVID, right? Like one of my friends who was like an investor had started to get kind of post content about it, and I was like, oh wow, this is super interesting. I started getting back into it myself, and then I ended up joining a group. I remember this is like in like November 2020. Joined a Facebook group called the Pokemon Collectors, and I saw this. I saw that this guy Kenny Martinez was going to be hosting a live stream where he, was going to be selling Pokemon cards. And I was like, hey, Samit, my co-founder, I was like, hey, dude, we should go ahead and check out the stream. And it was going to be on a Saturday night at 7:30 Pacific time, 10:30 Eastern time. Samit had just got married, but I convinced them to like, hey, let's go join and watch the stream together on this Facebook group. And so we watched the stream, and what this guy was doing was he basically was doing something called a rip and ship / box break. So if you think about any sort of like pack opening videos on YouTube, he was
Right.
basically doing this, but focusing on like Pokemon cards. And so what he did was he was just saying, hey, you can pay me for this pack of cards, and then I will open it on the live stream for you, and I will share the cards that I'm opening up to other people that are watching the stream as well. And this act of kind of like unboxing is very, very exciting, right? Everyone gets
Mm.
super pumped about it because like, at the very least, you get to see and discover new cards from your hobby that, you may have not seen in a while, or discovering for the first time.
Mm.
At best, you may uncover a card that's super valuable. Like with Pokemon, you may unlock like a Charizard. With sports cards, you may unlock like a LeBron James or something like that from opening the pack. And I was personally super enthralled by the experience. I was like, "Oh, this is so cool." My co-founder Smith was like, "Oh wow, this is super interesting too." And so we were tens of people. There were like I think almost 50 people on the stream. And this guy who was hosting the stream, his name is Kenny. And we were just like, "Wow, this is so exciting!" Like people are so engaged. We're so engaged. But what we realized was that the core experience and interaction around this was not that great, right?
Mm,
Facebook had not, is not a platform that optimizes for live selling, right? And so, the core video experience was choppy, the chat was laggy. As a buyer, what you had to do was you had to pay the person on Venmo or PayPal, and then he had to
right,
go in and confirm that, like, you actually sent the payment. Then he would open the cards for you, and then you need to send him a message saying, "Hey, this is my address. Send it to this." So it was just like a very kind
right.
of like, messy user experience that we thought that, like, we're just like, yeah, we could definitely build a much better thing. And so that's when we started working on Drip. And Drip, core goal of Drip was, we wanted to build it as a kind of, a marketplace and tooling company focused on, live selling of these collectibles. And ended up going back, in December, going back to the ENIAC guys. They kind of said, I said, "Hey, I'm like working on different stuff in live video, like I'm still trying to figure it out." And it was just like, "Okay, but I have a co-founder, and do you guys want to meet him?" So they ended up meeting him in New York because they're all based in New York. They met him, and they were like, "Hey, this guy's good. We don't think you're quite there yet, but we're happy to still give you some money." So
Mm,
again, this is another kind of like, very kind of blessing of some folks just being there and willing to make the investment in me despite me kind of like still figuring stuff out, right? And so they made the bet, and we ended up taking in the capital and started building our product in earnest in January 2021. We then launched the product in April 2021, have been in the road, just growing at a really fast clip since then. So we
yeah.
launched April 2021. Since launch, we've grown volume on the platform by over 2,500x. Uh,
Wow.
People who are selling products on our platform, again, we're live stream commerce, have made tens of millions of dollars since we've launched. We've also been
Wow.
able to, and what that's really meant is that, we've really just created economic opportunity for these people. So
Yeah.
like there are tons of folks who are, as a result of being able to do this, they're able to quit their jobs outright. Like we've had many people quit their jobs outright to just sell on our platform. And, they've been able to build up businesses that are generating like, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on our platform. And, and really kind of like get closer to actually, accomplishing the American dream from selling products on our platform. And so like that's been like for me the coolest thing that we've seen from building Drip. And then the other thing is like we've just been able to raise a ton of capital, right? So since raising, we've raised almost $30 million from leading investors in Silicon Valley as well. We've been able to hire almost 50 people from throughout the world that now work at Drip to really continue to push on our mission of empowering people to earn a living from selling the products they're passionate about. So that's been a super super exciting journey, and happy to kind of answer any specific questions that you want to ask about that experience so far.
Yeah. Before I get back into Drip and the amazing success you guys have had so far and will have in the future, I was noticing a theme across a lot of your life of the kid who snuck into the gifted classes and when he wasn't supposed to,
Mhm,
or like you said, Ron Brown scholars have a long history of going to Harvard. The one who chooses to go to Yale, the
mhm,
one who gets an internship at a firm that normally folks got to have MBAs in order to be in this mix. You somehow
mhm.
find your way there. Have you always been that kind of person that even if every box isn't checked, even if I don't have what quote unquote is needed to have, I'm going to find a way to show that I deserve to be in this room? Is that a part of your identity that you're aware of, that you take pride in, or is that just kind of a product of you just just kind of going through life and trying to make things happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely not something that like I've been consciously aware of. On I think I probably became more consciously aware of this characteristic as I've over the last, I'd say, like 3 to 5 years of my life.
Mm,
Um, I don't like, but I fundamentally don't attribute like this kind of just like drive and ambition and just willingness to keep on pushing despite the odds, right? Like that's not something that's like of my doing, right? I think it's a
mm,
combination of my circumstance and the people that I've been fortunate to have in my life, right? So I think I think the natural circumstance of coming from, being born to a teenager mother in a third world country and coming to the US and getting access to better resources and seeing the impact of, some of my efforts, but also the efforts of other people around me is a massive advantage
Yeah.
that like has imbued me with a tremendous amount of confidence in myself, but also, more importantly, like self-belief and
Right.
all that stuff just keeps on reinforcing itself. Like I've just been on this like positive feedback loop in terms of like all
Yeah.
these great experiences. So I think that's one. It's like that circumstance, and a huge underlying component of this circumstance is just people that have just been willing to invest in me throughout my career and my life has just been tremendous. Like from the time I was a kid in Jamaica, all the people like in my communities that like gave me food, that like gave me gifts, right? That encouraged me, right? To the sacrifices that my mom has made. Think about how many like single teenage mothers have the intuition to decide to move to the US and then kind of make sure that your child is like doing the right things
Right.
despite not having those collections of experiences themselves, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, I'm the product of an incredible mother, right? Like who has that insight. I'm thinking about I'm 32 now. Like when my mother was 32, I was like a 15, 16-year-old kid, right? Like how do so I think I'm extremely fortunate to have an incredible mother. And then, other people like other family members, other mentors and kind of inherited family, like from folks in Ron Brown to, folks that I've met, throughout my career that have just decided, maybe even against my, even without like me deserving it, that they would make an investment in me in some way. So I'm just extremely fortunate. Like I'm not here because, obviously I've worked really, really hard to get here, but a huge reason why I'm here is because of the people that have invested in me throughout my life and
Right.
career.
Yeah. Yeah. Most definitely, man. So back to Drip, you raised $30 million. Sure, I read that your valuation is north of $100 million.
Yep.
Um, what does a kid who grew up without much in Jamaica think? Just when you look at those numbers and realize that you're responsible, you were involved in making this happen, and you're continuing to build it. Do you ever wake up and like not recognize where you are, or like is it ever like a surreal moment where you're just like, wow, I'm really building something that's pretty big?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think the feeling I feel more than anything else is gratitude. Like
Yeah.
that's it. Like it is just like I think, in some ways I'm surprised at where I am, but I'm also not. I'm not surprised, right? In
Right.
fact, like I would say I'm not where I want to be right now, right?
Mm.
Like in my career, like I feel like I expect more from myself than where I am right now. Obviously, doing very well, but I expect more from myself. But at the same time, I have this, I think what I wake up and what I feel usually when I think about this is just gratitude,
Yeah.
right? It's gratitude for, the people that have invested in me to this point, gratitude for the circumstances that have kind of led me to this point, and gratitude, to 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 God, right? For kind
Yeah.
of getting me here, right? And
Absolutely.
so that's usually I would say it's less surprise to sum up, it's less surprise and it's more gratitude.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure the ride to get here where Drip is now has
Mm,
been an intense one, been a
mm,
very hard one over the last couple of years. You have an unrelenting optimism and a relentless pursuit to, like you said, an ambition. A lot of it has roots in your background, but founding a company can be hard. Like
mm.
there can be some days where things get difficult. Have you had any of those days thus far? And what what kind of made those days hard for you?
Yeah, I've had a lot of those days, and I think, I've had to do a lot of kind of like wild stuff to kind of just aggressively try to get to this point. But what I would actually say is that my a lot of my journey up to even starting Drip has, I would say like has prepared me for these moments. right? I think in a great way. The way I think about it is I try to put it in context, right,
Mm,
based on my own experience. So I think the first way that I contextualize this is that like, hey, like if our if our servers break and like our platform is down, or like if like like we face some pressure from a competitor, that's not nearly as hard as waking up and not being able to have a meal, right? Like
mm,
there's just like there's nothing that's like, in fact, it is a privilege to have these problems, right?
right, right,
And so I think that's a huge part of the way I contextualize it is like I am deeply privileged that our servers are broken or that one of our competitors is being super annoying or aggressive. I'm extremely blessed to have that. So I think that's the first thing is like contextualizing that experience. I think the second thing that's also really really important that I think about as well is that I just expect it, right? I think I've been fortunate. I think one of the things I've been fortunate to after having spent time as an investor and also having spent time tinkering with other things in the past, it's like, I just expect that stuff is not gonna go well, like, stuff is gonna break, like, that is just part of the experience, and I think one of the core things that, like, I've learned, about being a founder as well is that it is okay for all those things to break, but I can't break, right?
mm,
And, I think my collection of experiences has made me able to handle that, but it's like, stuff's gonna break.
right,
My job is as those things break, is to stay calm and start to think through what is a solution to this problem and empower, the people that I need to within my team to help to get to solutions.
right. One of the values that you said, kind of the core theme that you were looking for in whatever venture you were going to start was creating economic opportunity for other
Mm,
people. And that was really
ye
important to you. And what I've found in talking to a lot of scholars in our community who have started companies, that a lot of them in a variety of different industries are doing things that are somewhat RBS in nature in a lot of
Yep.
respects,
Mhm.
of creating economic opportunity for other
Yep.
people. Obviously,
Yep.
giving us the ability to go to school. For you, even just when after leaving LinkedIn and getting into VC, you're you know putting money in the hands of entrepreneurs who are building great companies and investing in them. And now you've built this platform where you're being people investing in you to then create a platform for other people. It sounds to me that getting rich was never important to you. Having a whole lot of money was never important to you. And I'm wondering, what were there any moments being at Bain or being at LinkedIn or being at a place like Yale where money felt like the most important thing, or pursuing success just for the sake of it felt like what you needed to do? Or have you always had this like very self kind of just like a north star, or stability that I know exactly why I'm here, I know what I'm going to do, and money's going to take care of itself, and I'm going to be fine regardless.
Yeah. The thing I really focus on is, like, how do I have, like, the largest scale positive impact on as many people as possible? Like, that is, for me, like, the kind of like the coalescing North Star that I have, had throughout my life, and the reason why I, have that North Star is because of the people who have invested in me and the unlikely nature of my circumstance or my circumstances
Right.
that have gotten me through here. Like, it's just so unlikely that I would have been able to get to this point. And so I need to be able to, like, my core focus is how do I maximize the impact that I can have the positive impact I can have on as many lives as I possibly can, um, by virtue of, the collection of things that I've been able to benefit from.
Right.
With that being said, I think that money is a very important instrument for that. Um, and so for me, I'm gonna look to maximize the amount of money that I'm able to generate, from the things that I'm doing, right?
Right.
Because I know that, having that capital is gonna be an extremely critical tool for me to have the impact that I want to have, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, sky's the limit. Like the goal is,
Right.
for me, it's from a career perspective, spend my next, the next 1 or 2 decades as an entrepreneur building companies, ideally generate, hundreds, if not billions of dollars from those efforts, and then leverage, and then, but from those efforts, continue to work on the highest impact sets of projects that I possibly can, starting with live shopping now, but over time, like doing space travel or quantum computing or machine learning at a higher scale, right? To have these like large scale impacts on people, and then generate that, leverage that, extra capital to then reinvest in back into the causes that I care about, right? I
Right.
think is a huge part of it. So I think, to kind of answer your question, kind of like clarify on your point, like I actually think money is important, but money is a
Mm.
tool,
Right.
right? I view money more as a tool now than I did before, and I think a huge
Right.
part of it, I think, is a privilege that I get to kind of think like that now,
Right.
right? That money is actually a tool to kind of maximize the positive impact I can have on the world.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. If you want to hear more inspiring conversations like this one, don't forget to click subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. To learn more about the organization, check us out at ronbrown.org.